I feel it in my bones to let the system grow. Welcome to the new age, to the new age. Welcome to the new age, to the new age. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm radioactive, radioactive. I'm radioactive, radioactive. Actually, on second thought, let's not call you radioactive. I want to call you Jaden instead. That is acceptable. You are probably correct. Radioactive, 'tis a silly name. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Thine Own Self, which is episode 16 of season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 7th season episode, Thine Own Self. So Thine Own Self is the episode in which Data is recovering a radioactive probe on a planet that has a primitive civilization, and an accident occurs where he loses his memory. He doesn't know who he is, and he wanders into a village carrying the radioactive fragments. However, he no longer realizes what radioactive means, and so he befriends the town magistrate and his daughter, and since he needs money, they sell off the metal fragments, and then, of course, people start getting sick because they're radioactive, but nobody knows why. But Data does soon concludes that the commonality that all the sick people have is they all came in contact with the metal fragments, and he goes to collect them. However, the village people start to become afraid of Data because they match his arrival with people getting sick and think that he's come there to destroy them, and they attack him and reveal the circuitry underneath, and so they think that he's some kind of monster. However, Data works with the young girl that he befriended to come up with a cure, and he manages to cure everyone of this disease by pouring the cure into the water supply. However, the village people encounter him while he's doing that and think he's trying to kill them all, and so the main blacksmith guy drives a spike through Data, which they believe kill him. However, later, Riker and Crusher show up looking for Data, and the young girl tells the story of her friend who saved the entire village by sacrificing himself. But they find Data's body and beam it up to the Enterprise, where Geordi is able to reactivate him with no problem. And they also gather up all the probe fragments and beam them up to the ship as well. And so Data has no memory of his time on the planet, but Crusher informs him that he made a friend with the young girl. Meanwhile, while this is taking place, Troi has decided that she wants to become a commander, so she takes the commander's test, which she struggles with at first. At least the engineering section is unable to find a solution until she finally realizes that she needs to order Geordi to his death, which is the key solution. She feels like she failed because she felt horrible while doing it and it took her too long to figure it out. However, Riker assures her that she passed and she is promoted to commander. So, first of all, I gotta say with my intro, every time I think of that song, Radioactive, I think of the show The 100, because they played that song a lot. In fact, they had like different versions in like later seasons. They had like the softer version or whatever. But anyway, like done by a different vocalist. But yeah, I was never that into that song, just to be clear. I just heard it around and stuff, mainly from other shows and movies and whatnot. But it did make me think of it when the whole thing was we're going to call you radioactive. But another review I watched brought up the fact that they wished they would have referred to Data as Radioactive Man. That would have been awesome. I didn't think of that one. Watch out, Radioactive Man! So if you don't get that reference, then you don't watch The Simpsons, so I can't help you. But anyway, yeah, that would have been great. So I've always liked this episode. I wouldn't say it was one of my favorite episodes. And I think I didn't really like it when I first saw it. Like, I thought it was fine when I first saw it. I think it was a couple years later when I was a bit older, maybe 19, 18, something like that, where I watched it once and it just hit me. I was like, ooh, like hit me in the feels of this is actually a really good episode. And now, being much older and watching it to analyze it and overthink it like the nerd that I am, I like it even more because I think it's a really good character story for Data. Now the funny thing is that I've watched several reviews, as I tend to do, and some reviews said they liked the Data storyline but not the Troi storyline, or liked the Data storyline better. And other reviews said they liked the Troi storyline better. And I think it was kind of split from the reviews I've watched. But all of them seem to have a preference. None of them were said, oh, they're both equal. I also have a preference, and it's very easily the Data storyline. I actually don't understand those who say that the Troi storyline was better. I think the Troi storyline was fine, but I think the Data storyline was great. So every time we went back to the Troi storyline, I was like, can we get back to the Data storyline? I think that's the heart of the episode. Now, there are some cliches involved in the Data storyline. It is not what I would call a completely original idea. And I think that is mainly where it lies. People have issues with it. And I know for my sister, not speaking for her, but from memory, she doesn't like this episode because it's an amnesia storyline. She seems to have a particular hatred, like oversensitivity in my opinion, of amnesia storylines, and she describes that's because when she was younger she watched a lot of shows, cartoons and stuff like Super Friends or whatnot, and the amnesia storyline was such a regular staple in all these shows that they just repeatedly do it over and over again. She got really sick of it. She's 5 years older than me, so I don't really have any memory of such things. I think a lot was like in late 70s, early 80s, and I was too young to remember that, or not born yet. And so I don't have that memory of all of this amnesia storylines. I have vague recollections of maybe some, like even some like in the later 80s had done it. Some of these cartoons I watched, like DuckTales or stuff like that, might have done some amnesia storylines, but I don't have this aversion to it. Like, I'm not entirely sick of it, and so it doesn't bother me at all, especially because, and I think this makes a huge difference, they don't use the term amnesia. Like, if this was Riker and he went to the planet, he got bonked in the head, and he's like, I got amnesia, and he wanders in the vision into a village, and he's like, oh, he's got amnesia, then that would have bothered me more. I wouldn't have been okay with that, because that's silly, the whole bonk in your head, you get amnesia. But this is Data. And so the issue is he got zapped with energy, and that messed with his circuits, and so it had the technological effect on him of wiping his memory. I'm more okay with that, because that's not a amnesia. Oh, this is because amnesia is not really a thing. something my sister would bring up. It doesn't really exist. You don't really get bonked in the head and you forget everything. And even though this is essentially the same thing, it's essentially the same exact result. It's the same story where a character loses all their memories. The fact that it's a technological issue and they're not just saying, oh, he got amnesia, to me that actually makes a huge ass difference. Maybe to some people like my sister it doesn't, but for me it does, because it's not a goofy silly thing. It's the kind of technobabble bullshit that Star Trek does all of the time. And so it's more at place. It's at home. It's not like a dumb goofy soap opera thing. It's the usual, just the typical, here we go, normal stuff that Star Trek does. And so I'm fine with it. And I'm not saying I like it. That's not why I like this episode. I don't like it because, hey, they're doing this great amnesia storyline. No. I like it because it's a really great character story for Data. And that's how I say, like, and plus, like, alright, so there's several levels of this, of why I think this is such a great character story for Data. If you're familiar with my channel, if you've seen any of my other reviews where I talked about Data, you should be aware that I particularly love episodes that portray the humanity in Data, but, you know, do it in his own android way, like a way that makes sense for him being an android, but shows that he's more than the sum of his circuits, more of a sum of his parts, that he's striving to be human, and he does portray human tendencies. He's like an artificial human being. He's not just robot, you know? That he has human tendencies and stuff, and so I love episodes that focus on this, and I think this episode is probably one of the best in that regard because it does it in such a subtle way. Like, my favorite part of the episode, the one that gives me chills, which I've watched, just recently watched a review where they thought it was cheesy as hell. I actually love it. Is the scene where Chia, the young girl, is talking about, or is it Gia? Some Gia, I think. Anyway, whatever her name is. She's talking about, believe her mother, or someone who died. Yeah, I think it was her mother. And saying that she went to this, great place where there's no disease, no harm, and everyone happy and live in peace. And she asked Data, do you really think that there's a place like that? And he's looking out at the stars at night and at the moon, and he says, yes. And like that. That gives me chills. And I can see why some people think that's cheesy, but I actually think it's great because it shows, this is one of the best moments of Data in the entire show, because it shows him again being more than just the sum of the parts, more than just a stupid android. He doesn't remember his time on the Enterprise, but he has this almost subconscious inner feeling of what it's like. And so when she mentions this beautiful place where everyone gets along and whatnot, Roddenberry's whole vision, that rings a bell for him. But he's not, it was more on a subconscious level. And the way he says yes is like a longing. There's emotion in that, but not too much where you don't buy it, but enough where you buy for Data, who is emotionless, but is more of a sense of kind of a subconscious. It's hard to put into words, but it's a subconscious level of being at peace, or knowing that there's this better place out there. And I just thought that was fucking amazing, and I thought the way Brent Spiner played it well. That's the scene in particular that gives me chills. That's the one that really hit me and made me realize how great this episode was. But it's not just because of that scene. On top of that, it's the whole relationship that Data has with Garvin and Gia. It's done really, really well. And so this episode was written by Ronald D. Moore. I couldn't really tell from the A plot, which is definitely the Data storyline, regardless of what anyone might say. But I really, I thought it was, I wasn't sure who wrote it. I thought maybe it was Rene Echevarria, because it's a great character story, and he's good at writing for Data. But Ronald D. Moore is also good character stories as well. So it makes sense that it's him. Now the B plot, that I could tell was Ronald D. Moore. That instantly, that seems like a Ronald D. Moore. The style, the way it's written about Troi wanting to become a commander and having to sacrifice someone. That's his jam. That's his thing. But anyway, But yeah, it's written very well. Just the friendship, the way it slowly develops, the pacing of it, how Garvin's scared at first, but Gia's kind of hiding in the corner. Just the whole way, and how they give him a name. It's called call him Jaden, and give him clothes, and it's just done so well. It's again, some of the best character moments for Data in the show. And I will say that, and I brought this up earlier in the episode Hero Worship, because I signal out these 3 episodes, or 2 episodes in the movie, if you want to get technical, of them trying to have Data pair him up with a young child, and have the friendship between the android and the young child, and do an art house type thing. So it was Hero Worship was the first time they did this. This was the second time, and the third will be in Insurrection, the movie. So this is easily the best. Not only the best, but the only one that actually works. The Hero Worship I talked about, there's flaws with that. The child should be, more traumatized when he realized it has to deal with his parents' death, which he was in denial. He was evading having to deal with the trauma, and they never affected that. He seemed to not give a shit about the trauma, and they treated him more like, oh, isn't it funny? He's emulating Data, ha ha ha. So I don't think that was Joe Manowski, who, in my humble opinion, not as good as a writer as Ronald D. Moore. So that wasn't handled very well. Then you have Insurrection, which Michael Piller wrote that. I'm a huge fan of him, but that's not one of his best works. And the relationship between Data and the young boy, it was a really, really minor side plot, so it wasn't fully developed, and it was obviously just there to be isn't it cute that the young child's being friends with Data and asking him questions about himself? And no, it's not. It just come off as dumb and cliche, and it was just a goofy side plot that I just it seemed contrived. It seemed obvious when I watch it. I don't think, oh, this is a really interesting relationship that Data's having with the young child. I think the writers are trying to shove this relationship down my throat and be like, look how cute. So it's the writer, I can hear the writer in my head going, look at how cute they are. And so it doesn't seem natural. It seems contrived. And it's just not good. Whereas here, this is natural. They have as I said, the structure of how they meet and their friendship, you buy their relationship. It seems like they have a really, they're really befriended. And so the moment you get towards the end of the episode, when Data has his face ripped off, that too bad Nicolas Cage didn't play him. His face off. And he has his face ripped off, and Gia is confronted by him and trying to be I'm not scared, but actually being terrified. but then overcoming that fear to realize that Data's there to help, like, that was such a powerful moment. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this yet, and I should have. The actress who plays Gia is so good. So good, especially compared to a lot of the child actors this show has had in the past, which I have railed against. Like, the only one who was, that I can think of from my recollection, who was also just as good was the girl who played Claire in the episode Imaginary Friend, who I'm about to talk about shortly because she's going to make another appearance on Deep Space Nine pretty soon. But she's a good actress. But yeah, a lot of the other child actors have been mediocre to terrible. Like, the one in Hero Worship was mediocre. Like, he was good until he had to play an emotional scene, and then the cracks were showing. So it was a decent performance. The ones in Rascals, with the exception of the actress who played Guinan, who was actually pretty good, they were all crap. They were all terrible. And the Imaginary Friend, the one who played the Imaginary Friend, was terrible. And I'm trying to think. The ones in Disaster, they were not very good either. And Alexander, he's okay. Like, he's fine. Like, I never had that issue, but I wouldn't really call him like a great actor or anything like that. But yeah, so Eric is pretty good, but he only has a very small role. He wasn't like a huge focus the way that Gia is in this episode. And she and the chemistry that her and Brent Spiner have is so good. Like, it so works. You buy their sort of mentorship. And as I said, like, the moments when, she's asking him about it, telling him about her mother, it seems like, she's missing that second parental figure, and sort of imprints that on Data, and sort of befriends him on sort of that regard, and Data fills that role pretty well. So, their relationship, to me, is easily the strength of the episode. That is, I don't care how cliche the Frankenstein storyline is or the Amnesia storyline is. I like good character stories. And if you give me cliche plots in order to tell great character stories with great acting, then to me that makes it okay. That makes it great, in fact, that you have utilized such great character story. Like, the chemistry between them is just, it's touching. It's actually a very touching relationship, and it's a height in Data's relationship in Data's, character story throughout the entire show, series, franchise. That this is the time where he really bonded with a young girl and meant something. Like, at that ending where Crusher and Riker beam down, she thinks he's dead, and just talks about he saved us all. That's tragic. Like, a tear is almost coming to my eye just talking about it. Because even though we know Data's not dead, because he's, an android, and they're just going to go back and fix him, she thinks he's dead, and she will always think that he's dead. So as far as she's concerned, her good friend, mentor, who sacrificed himself to save everyone, was killed and is dead, and the weight of that on her and how that's going to affect her, that's emotional, that's sad. Even though Data himself, obviously not dead, it's still tragic, it's still sad, and that is such good writing. That is so powerful that are able to sell that moment. Now, I will get to my one complaint, though, about this storyline. The biggest issue that I had with it, and it's so unnecessary, and I don't even know why they did it. When they reactivate Data, he has no memory of what happened. Why are you going to do that? Why would it hurt if he actually remembered his time on the planet, but he got all of his memories back from himself, Data, but he also retained the memories he had on the planet. Like that, why wouldn't they do that? Like, that's so better, because that would change his character going forward. It would affect him. Data would remain having this memory, and he might, when he first woke up, having both memories of his time on the planet and of who he actually is, think of it differently. I was like, oh, that is strange that I behaved that way, and I actually, had this young girl who I really meant a lot to, and how that would affect him. And they, even though she will remember it, so I don't think it completely ruins the episode, to be clear, because at least Gia and everyone else will still remember it. It would have been better if Data remembered it as well. I mean, you do have Dr. Crusher saying, oh, there was a young girl who you meant a lot to, so he'll be aware of it. But in an abstract sense, he won't have any specific memories. Oh yeah, the other relationship that was done so poorly and mostly off screen that I totally forgot about was pen pals, when he apparently made friends with the young girl. But that happened almost entirely off screen, so you don't buy it. You don't buy their friendship. It seems hollow. It seems fake. And it's a shame that he remembered that, but not this. This was a lot more meaningful and definitely way better written. Just throwing that out there. So that is the biggest fault of this episode, of this particular storyline, particularly that I think it has. But it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't ruin the episode for me. It's still a very, very powerful episode. I will say the stuff with the scientist was really interesting. Again, that's kind of nice sort of nuanced writing, where she obviously her science is a bit off, because these people are not that sort of evolved on the civilization scale, and so she thinks fire isn't one of the crucial elements, or that it's alive or something like that, that it's inside of wood because wood's combustible, and Data's able to be like, well, no, that doesn't make sense. So he retains that. That was kind of neat. I thought there was some humor involved, and I do like how the scientist lady was very irritated with Data at first. Like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, until he proved himself by creating this complex fucking microscope, and then she was like, I see, and starts to realize, oh my god, he does know what he's talking about. And they could have played her as super jealous and also wanting to kill him. But I'm glad they didn't. It's so much better not. It's so much better that eventually, even though she is kind of, at first kind of aggravated with him, but eventually realizes that he is trying to save them, that he is actually correct, and learns to trust his science. And that was a nice touch. And there was the blacksmith dude, who's played by an actor I've seen tons of times and tons of different things. They're the typical, as I said, the pitch for this episode was this, and apparently it was one of the freelancers who also pitched Gambit. But the pitch for this episode was Frankenstein with Data as Frankenstein. And so that's kind of very typical, the villagers with torches and pitchforks and whatnot. But it makes sense. It is a cliche, but kind of for good reason, because it portrays how people are driven by the fear of the unknown, which is absolutely totally a thing, and it's been used in movies and storylines repeatedly over and over again, so it's become a bit of a cliche and a bit tiresome, but it's tried and true. And as I say, it's not like the main focus. The main focus is the character story. So the way it works, I'm perfectly okay with. I think that's fine. Now, I should address one of the biggest complaints I've seen other people have about this episode, and that's the fact that Data remembers everything about like science and all this stuff. He knows, enough to build all this shit, yet he doesn't know what the word radioactive means. So why did he not remember that? His memory loss seems to be specific to what the plot requires. But I don't care, actually. Like, I don't know, that to me that's the kind of normal plot contrivances that Hollywood has all the time, and stuff that you have to suspend disbelief for and just go with. I don't even think a huge suspension of disbelief is required. Like, to just say, oh, well, whatever happened in his memory circuits affected his knowledge of what radioactive means. Fine. It's all technobabble nonsense anyway with Star Trek. It's all fantasy nonsense. So I'm perfectly willing to go with this. Not actually a big deal to me, as it apparently is for some people. One thing I did notice about the set of the village, which I liked, I thought that was a pretty interesting set. However, when I started to really pay attention to it, I started to realize that it looked very similar to the village, to the little colony where Ro was at in a preemptive strike where the Cardassians showed up and attacked them. In fact, it also looks a little bit similar to the village that Wesley was at the home planet of the Native Americans when the Travelers showed up. So you start to realize how they recycled, some of the same set and, moved it around, made it look a little different. Although I think this looked very similar to the set on Preemptive Strike. But, I don't begrudge them that. They don't have much of a budget. They gotta use their money wisely. So let's get to the Troi storyline. I don't really have as much to say about this, and as I said, I'm quite perplexed by people who prefer this storyline because, I didn't mention that I could tell Ronald D. Moore read it. Especially the solution was that she had to sacrifice Geordi. Here's my biggest question about this storyline is, does Geordi know that the requirement on the test to become a commander is they have to send him to his death? I'm just there. Are they doing that? Did they let him know? Oh, by the way, Geordi, when someone takes this test, you're gonna have to. The solution is they have to kill you. Although, what if he wanted to be promoted to commander? Now, I've heard some reviewers seem to be a bit confused about Counselor Troi and her becoming a commander. Even the Delta Flyers, they seem to be, Delta Flyers don't do TNG. What am I talking about? It must have been someone else. But anyway, some people were confused about Deanna Troi and Dr. Crusher. First of all, Dr. Crusher was always a commander. When did she become a commander? It was the very start of the show. In fact, she even mentioned in this episode, 8 years ago I became a commander. That's before the show started. Because she had those 3 pips from the very first episode. She just never utilized her command abilities until the Descent episode, and that's another person say, oh, we've never seen her in Command of the Bridge. I'm like, did you forget Descent? She even mentioned Descent at the start of this episode, and that's what re-sparked her sort of motivation to take more bridge shifts. So she's always had that ability, she's just never really utilized it until her experience in Descent. So that's one thing. Deanna Troi, even though they do this joke that makes it a bit confusing at the end of the episode where after Data, comes back and she's like, oh, I got promoted to commander, so you can call me sir now. And Data says, yes, sir. The thing is, though, is that Data is still second in command of the ship. Or third of command, second officer. But he's still third in command after Picard and Riker. So, in terms of command, Data actually outranks both Troi and Crusher, even though technically they have a higher rank than him, because, and other reviewers actually explained this pretty well, Crusher and Troi are not in the command track. They're on the medical sciences side of things. So usually people in the medical sciences track do not command a ship because they are not in the command track. That's why they're becoming commander, so that that gives people in the science medical track the ability to take some command shifts. But they're still not in the pecking order of who's in command. They're still not in consideration. Like it would be Worf, for example, who's only a lieutenant, would still be in the higher pecking order because he's a senior bridge officer on the command track, or security, but still close enough, still not medical sciences. So he would be in the higher pecking order than. That's why when, for example, in Gambit, when Picard and Riker left the ship, Crusher didn't take over, even though she's a higher rank than Data, because she's not in that command track order. I thought this made perfect sense, but I watched so many reviews and people seem to be confused by this. And so people think that, Troi is now in a higher command position than LaForge, so if Picard and Riker and Data were incapacitated, then Troi would take command. Actually, no. LaForge would take command. And then after LaForge would be Worf, because they're on the sort of command side of things. Even though it's engineering security, it's still sort of the... Well, Geordi's a bit iffy because he's the chief engineer, but if we're going to go by Scotty rules, then yeah, I would say is more in that track that medical sciences is this own separate thing. Well, not science, because then you got Dax, but mainly medical, like kind of, which is what Troy's mental health still medical side, which is separate. Like they didn't attend Starfleet Academy. They went to Starfleet Medical. But anyway, and apparently, I don't know, they're unclear whether or not there's an engineering school or whatever, but anyway, not getting into weeds of this. The point is, I thought that was pretty clear, and the reason why, and so they're saying, oh, does that mean LaForge can't command the ship because he's not a commander, he's only a lieutenant commander? No, that's not what it means, because he's not on the medical track. But anyway, I think you get me. You get me what the show is trying to say. And to be fair, this episode was the first one that really brought up the whole thing about, if you have to become a commander if you're in the medical track in order to command the bridge. Which, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to this because Troi took command of the bridge in Disaster, but in Disaster there was no one else available except for ensigns and Chief O'Brien, who was a chief, and so in that case they weren't, I suppose because there weren't any senior officers there, that she's considered a senior officer, and so she's probably at the bottom of the pecking order as far as the 7 senior officers, main cast members go. But anywho, yeah. So, but as far as the whole storyline with Troi wanting to become commander, and like she got the idea because she went to a school reunion that took place off screen. I mean, it doesn't seem like, I don't know. It didn't get me invested in the story. It just seemed like it was something. Seemed like what it was. filler to take up time in the episode, because this is what happened. They came up with the main storyline and they didn't know it couldn't take up an entire episode, so they thought, oh, we need to come up with a B plot, but the B plot needs to take place entirely on the ship because it's going to cost way too much money to do all these other sets, so we got to do something cheap. And so apparently they had this idea. They were thinking of doing this in the episode Liaisons, with Troi taking a test to become commander, but they never did it, and so they're doing it here instead. And yeah, I mean, it was fine. I didn't think it was bad. It's the solution of her, trying to figure out the engineering and reading all these specs, and Riker's like, you can read all the technical manuals you want, you're still going to fail the test, and then her figuring out, oh, I'm meant to send someone to their death. Like, again, very Ronald D. Moore. And, yeah, other than my question of, is Geordi okay with this? Yeah, it was kind of powerful. It was kind of interesting. It was that she had to tap into that side, but there's no deeper meaning behind it. Like, it doesn't tie into Data's storyline. It doesn't tie into the title of the episode, Thine Own Self, because she's not really being true to thine own self. She just wanted to impress her old high school buddies, and as having to go outside of her comfort zone to kill LaForge. So yeah, there's no greater theme. It was just filler there to take up the episode, and that's how I judge it. Like, it doesn't hurt the episode to me, but it certainly doesn't help it either. It's the Data stuff is the heart, is why I love this episode. So I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I'm very ever grateful for all of those who support me. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Antarius, Jordan Johnson, and Brandon Neal-House. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miglasio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Thine own self, more like wine and smell." I don't remember the episode. Mark, is it good? Is it better than Endgame? If I am only watching one episode of TNG, should it be this one or Code of Honor? Definitely Code of Honor. Next. Sorry. Yes, it is good, to answer your question. Anyway, and asking if it's better than Endgame, you might as well ask if it's better than staring at the wall for 2 hours. Anyway, which the answer is yes, it is. So next comment is from Antarius, who says, both stories were good and enjoyable. I think Riker was unnecessarily harsh towards Troi. Besides that, it must be very hard to keep this test, like the Kobayashi Maru test, a secret. The test reminded me of Star Trek II, where Kirk seemed to be not willing to order a crew member to repair the machine and pay with one's life. So Spock volunteered without Kirk's knowledge. Also, I wonder how fast Troi was taking all the different tests. I don't think Data spent much more than a month, or probably even less time on the planet, so she had very little time to learn for all these different tests. If you compare her abilities and characteristics this season with season 1, she had one of the greatest development of all characters in my opinion. I really liked the different people on the planet, but how was Data able to develop this potent medicine with the little resources he had? And I don't believe that Dr. Crusher knows so much about Data's systems that she's able to repair such a major damage rather easily. My rating is 8 out of 10. Well, Data knew how to make all the compound out of primitive stuff. The same reason, the same way that Spock knew how to make a time machine that could predict the future out of 20th century materials on a budget, so that the episode could happen. And because they're wizards, who cares? Or I don't care. I just go with it. Whatever, fine. What else? Yeah, I mean, I totally buy Dr. Crusher could repair Data easily. All they do is someone drove a spike through him for Data that seemed like, oh, all you got to do is fix this and fix that. It seems like an easy fix to me. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. And I do like how with Troi's test that she did ask. I was almost being a surrogate for the audience. Like, this isn't a test of character, is it? And I'm surprised she didn't say like the Kobayashi Maru, because that's what the audience is thinking. And Riker's like, no, it's not. I was like, thank God. Because that would be dumb if they were doing that. But yes, you do bring up a good point that this and the Kobayashi Maru is like how they keep this secret. Like, surely someone would be like, hey, this is what you need to do. But again, it seems like this isn't a common test. Like, I don't think all commanders need to take this. Like, I don't think Riker took it. Like, if Data wanted to become a commander, I don't think he'd take it. Worf, I don't think took it. like, I think it's just for if you want to switch from the medical track to the command track and you don't have any command training. That is my, again, assumption, but this is what I gather from the episode. So, in short, it's not that common of a test, so that's how they keep it secret. Whereas the Kobayashi Maru seems very common, so I don't know how the hell they kept that secret. Anyway, next question, or next comment, is from Norman Buchwald, who says, Thine Own Self is actually a neat episode. The A story, granted, feels more with respect to Data's character development to belonging in earlier seasons. I would argue about season 3 or 4. Even though Data no longer has the memory of his experience on this planet, a lot of what he is experiencing is stuff we already know and expect about him. Yeah, somehow his limited knowledge does not include to know what radiation is with, which is a little bit difficult to buy, even if his amnesia more electronic if it is selected. Yet unlike Conundrum, which to this day I cannot buy how someone this primitive from this primitive society not only knows how to erase minds of many species, but also Data's unique positronic brain. At least this episode makes it simple due to the glitch due to the tech accident, and as far as I'm concerned, the story is richer with respect to Data than in Conundrum. His relationship with the society and him being the other, or even a Frankenstein in this medieval-like culture, was good. It's just that by this point it seemed too typical Data episode than something new. You have to give the more maligned Masks credit for this, which I know is coming up shortly. As for Deanna's story, remember the twist that there's something going on. A reminder of Wesley's first season experience with the Academy was still new enough, and Deanna's story, Deanna's story of wanting to do better with good, was good and well deserved, and thankfully she isn't at least as of yet being asked to chase after Worf. Her and Riker are magic together in this mentor-mentee tale, and I have to admit, while I do like both stories well enough, I actually like Deanna's storyline better. I'll give this episode 7.5 radiation jewelries to wear out of 10. Well, okay, I'm perplexed by people who like the Troi storyline better. I think that Data's clearly far superior, but that is just me. Now, as for comparisons to Conundrum, I think this episode makes a lot more sense. It's a lot easier to buy because in Conundrum, there was a design, like an alien species was specifically omitting certain pieces of knowledge, and they were able to do this in all these different humanoid species and Data, which is completely unbelievable, and I think that strains suspension of disbelief to a point where I am no longer willing to go with it. Whereas here, there was no design. It was just an accident. Like, oops, accidentally forgot what radioactive means, but it remembers all this other science stuff. I'm more willing to go with that. To me, that seems less contrived because it wasn't so specifically designed. Well, I mean, by the writers it was, but not by a primitive species that shouldn't be able to do it, like in Conundrum. And also, like you mentioned, that it's a better character story for Data than Conundrum. That is an understatement. Data was just like, I'm a bartender. No, I'm not. And other than that, he didn't really have anything to do in that episode. So yeah, that's understatement of the year in my humble opinion. Yeah, now, I thought there was something else I wanted to comment on, but can't seem to remember. It'll probably come to me later. But anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy. He says, Riker, my first duty is to the ship, except this episode, Pegasus time again. While I was watching this brilliant episode, your review attached came on YouTube. Riker did show in Season 7 his different command skills. His command skills in one episode was stapling his mouth closed. TNG is almost over, so Riker's almost free. Data really shouldn't have lost his memory. However, the story is so good it doesn't bother me like his Waking Dream episode. Deanna Troi takes the command level test and fails. Did Riker actually help Troi when he said my first duty is to the ship, or did her superpower kick in? So my rating is a 10 out of 10. R.I.P. Jerry Taylor and Tony Todd. Yes, very sad losing treasured members of the Star Trek community. Wow, 10 out of 10. Really liked this episode. And, yeah, I still disagree with you about Riker and Pegasus, but that is another story. I don't think her superpower kicked in. No. Because she only senses emotion. Unless she could sense that Riker was really trying to drop a hint when he said that. But I don't think he even was. I think that was just... I don't think it was supposed to be written that way. I think it's supposed to be written that he was just given a reason of why he was being harsh on her, but that, like, turned on the light bulb just coincidentally for Troi. At least that's my interpretation of it. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Thine Own Self out of 10 is going to be a 9 excellent. Not quite there with the 10 as Stephen Kennedy was, but much higher than most other people, I think. Because, I love this episode. It's a great, great character story for Data. As I said, this relationship he has with this young girl is definitely the best sort of Data-child relationship they did in the franchise, easily, and it's like the only one that works, and it works really well, and it was a good just character development for Data to have that relationship. The fact that he was willing to sacrifice himself to save everyone, and that she will, as far as she's concerned, he died saving her. It's really touching. It's moments of this is really emotionally powerful and just hits me in the feels. Now, doesn't quite make it there to 10. The side plot I thought was just fine. But the fact that he doesn't remember these events, to me, that's really what keeps it from being a 10. Because that is a shame. I do think the episode would have been better. The show would have been better if he did remember. Like, it wouldn't have hurt. Like, there's no reason for him not to remember story-wise. Like, I don't really get why they did it that way. It doesn't really make any sense, because it would have been so much better. And it's such a simple thing. Just have him remember his time. But that being said, it doesn't ruin the whole episode. It's still a great episode. It is, this, as I said, the plot is a bit by the numbers cliche. It's a storyline. Frankenstein's storyline has been done a billion times before, but it is unique in putting Data, and that's not what makes this episode so great. What makes it great is the relationship that Data has, not just between Gia, but also with Garvin. Some of the best character moments for Data. So 9 out of 10 for me. So, those keeping track, I've given a lot of Season 7, so when I say a lot of Season 7 episodes, 9 and 10s in a row, well, if you have to take out Sub Rosa. So when I say that I love Season 7 more than most people, like, I'm not kidding. Like, because, so the recap, I gave Parallels a 10, Pegasus a 10, Homeward a 9, Skip Over Sub Rosa, I gave Lower Decks a 10, and this episode a 9. So, yeah, and I have a feeling those are much higher ratings than a lot of people would give. So, yeah, I do think there was, minus Sub Rosa, a really strong set of episodes in the middle of the season. And then going forward, it's going to go back to mediocrity. It's going to be bad to mediocre to averagely good episodes from here on out, until we get to the final 2 episodes of the season, which are the best 2 episodes of the season, and are both in my top 10 of the entire show. But until we get to those final 2 episodes, a lot of averagely good, mediocre to bad episodes. So this chunk in the middle, I think, was minus Sub Rosa, was, I keep having to throw in that caveat, was, since it's the worst episode of the entire damn show. But other than that, the chunk in the middle was actually really good. So, if you did enjoy this video, please, you can help out the channel by giving me a like, leave a comment. That kind of thing helps out in the algorithm, all that kind of stuff. And if you'd really like to support the channel, you can support me on Patreon. There'll be a link in the description below. There's different tiers for different budgets, different rewards, such as a Patreon-only video series I do where I revisit reviews that I've already made, and different other rewards, such as you can leave comments for me to read my reviews. I do pre-releases, and you can request a video for me to do, that sort of thing, and you can check it out if you're so inclined. Otherwise, just leaving a like, subscribing, all that other thing also really helps. So, let's see what's coming up next in the old channel here. So Wednesday will be my review for Paradise. Thursday, I'll be reviewing the series finale of Lower Decks Season 5. I'm so sad to see it go. Saturday will be my review for Masaka is Waking for Masks. Can't wait to talk about that episode. And then Monday, be my review for Shadow Play. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time, and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.